their worship when they're not establishing justice for the fatherless, the weak, the poor, the needy? Guess what? The churches in America have failed to establish justice for the poor, the weak, the needy, and the oppressed. The churches in America have treated abortion like it's just another issue.
There may be people here that are actively
this is the issue.
addressing the issue.
This is mass murder.
We were here when there was a conference before, but like not when they've actually had a church service. But I mean, I don't know. There might be a few here. I don't know what they're doing, but
and that is not the loving response.
Do you know if anyone here goes out to the abortion facilities during the week, like on a regular basis?
Actually, I know. He doesn't go to this church. His name is Tyler.
People are commanded
Tyler with the long beard. Maybe you know him, Tyler Jones.
I know him.
I know him pretty well. But what are you calling Christians to do? To go to Planned Parenthood?
A lot of people like to say, "Oh, that's their calling."
Well, there's actually one closer to this location in Des Plaines. It's about 6.5 miles from here. An abortion facility, American Women's Center, I think it's called. And it's about 6 or 7 miles from here. And what we're exhorting Christians to do here is to go out to the abortion facilities in large numbers, and rather than like when we go there, the sidewalks are empty. And basically to act like children are actually being murdered, because when we're aware that something's about to happen, like a shooting's about to take place, a lot of times it happens when no one knows about it. But when you know about it ahead of time, you act. You do something about it. You don't just say, "Well, I'm not called to do that." And what we're saying is, Christians for the most part are ignoring this evil. They know where the abortion facilities are. They know children are going to be murdered tomorrow morning, and yet they do nothing.
What's the right way to? So I know in the book of Romans, it talks about because of God's kindness, that's what leads people to repentance.
What's the point of reading your Bible if you're not going to obey
so obviously,
your Bible?
he's using a megaphone.
So people can hear him.
But how do you think people are actively supposed to engage the situation in their own community? Because not everybody is going to go out to a large facility with picket signs.
Oh, I know. I've been going out there for years, and most people they don't bother with it. Well, I'd say one.
Is there a way to have conversations with people who are thinking about abortion?
Well, that's one thing, but that's not going to abolish abortion by doing that. What Christians need to do is, what I started doing when I found out about this Holocaust, I started talking about it all the time. And what I found was most Christians don't talk about this. Very rarely, if ever. And that disheartened me. I'm like, why am I the only one who has any urgency to stop this?
Do you have anybody in your family that do you have like an experience in your own family or friends that abortion was like an option, or that became?
Yes, not me directly personally, but yes, I have. And God may have used that to bring me, like, I don't know. I know I heard about this Holocaust over Christian radio, and just the light bulb went on. Like, people are being murdered. I got to do something about that. And I've been astonished and heartbroken in the past decade. That was 10 years ago. Well, actually about 11 years ago now. I was heartbroken and amazed that Christians didn't care for the most part. I was the only one talking about it that I saw, that I heard. And I went out to the abortion facilities. Sometimes I was out there by myself, even on Saturdays. And I'm thinking, if we really believe abortion's murder, then why am I the only one acting like it? And I'm not saying I'm the only one in America acting like it. There are others. But like where I was, my sphere of influence, pastors weren't talking about it. They didn't have any urgency. They never went out to the abortion mills. And
what's the best way to talk to other Christians? Obviously this is a very, very confrontational way of kind of trying to get attention of people.
You know why we do it this way?
Why do you do it this way?
Same way we do other things is to have a loud wake-up call. I'm just going to say it generally because this is true what I've seen in the last decade. The vast majority of churches and Christians who go to church, they're asleep. They're just like the Christians in Nazi Germany. They are asleep, and sometimes you need a loud wake-up call to wake people up, and it does work. I've seen it, and I've heard other Christians wake up by talking to them, by going to churches, by going to other events, and so the loud wake-up call, while a lot of people might find it offensive or get angry, it does wake people up out of their apathy, and and when you have such an urgent situation where children are literally going to be murdered tomorrow morning, we need a loud wake-up call. And people might see it as hateful, but I just tell them, this is very loving for children tomorrow who are scheduled to be slaughtered. It's very loving to them, asking for help so that they won't be slaughtered. So that maybe one or two people here will go out to the Des Plaines abortion mill tomorrow morning, or whichever one's open tomorrow morning. We'll go out there instead of going about their business. And sometimes people need a loud wake-up call. And
honestly, obviously, I don't. To be honest with you, I haven't given abortion much thought. I don't even know the scope of it. I don't understand the laws really that govern it. I think because it hasn't affected my family or been directly kind of in my sphere of understanding or influence, that I haven't. I'm just being honest with you. I mean, there's other issues like poverty and things that have maybe taken more precedent in my mind, and
that's the problem with most people is they don't. I'm not saying you're doing this. I don't know, but most Christians that I've interacted with and just exhorted to do something about this, they only told me this is not the only issue, and I'm like, well, you wouldn't say that if your next door neighbor was going to be murdered tomorrow and you knew it. You wouldn't say, well, I'm going to concern myself with drug ministry. I'm not going to do anything about that. The problem is we dehumanize the preborn. We don't actually act like they're people who are being murdered, and that's. I mean, yeah, there are, just like in Nazi Germany, there were other issues, but the actual Christians in Nazi Germany, they prioritized it. And I tell people, we work on different fronts. I speak out against other things, and I do other things, but I put so much priority into this because there is no other area in our culture, really in the world, but here in our culture, that demands more urgency, more action than our preborn neighbors, because our culture says it's okay to murder children. Most Christians are doing nothing about it. I know that may sound, it's like people don't believe me. I'm like, I base that on my own experience and the experience of others who say, yeah, Christians and pastors, they don't want to do anything. And I'm not saying that they don't give to the pregnancy resource centers or volunteer there or support organizations. Yeah. What I mean is that they're not doing anything meaningful. They're not. What's that?
What you say?
Well,
I'm listening.
Because when you give to a pregnancy resource center or even volunteer or on the board or give money to organizations, that's not actually acting like people are being murdered. When you know someone's going to be murdered, you go to where they're going to be murdered, or you do what would help stop that murder. And I mean, there's a reason why this Holocaust continues 46 years now. It's because Christians are not acting like it. They did during the rescue movement. Some did. I mean, many did, but most of them were still.
I'm Nick, by the way. I'm sorry, I didn't even say my name. What's your name?
Nicholas.
Is your name Nicholas too?
You said your name's Nick?
Nick, yeah.
Okay, yeah, Nicholas.
Oh, you're Nicholas, okay.
Yeah, and that, other than the rescue movement, are you familiar with what I mean there, the rescue movement?
I don't know.
When back in the 80s and early 90s, thousands, I think tens of thousands of Christians and Catholics, they blocked the doors of abortion facilities. They put their bodies between the murderers and their intended victims, children. And that's really the only serious effort I've seen by Christians, for the most part, in the last 4.5 decades to end this Holocaust. Other than that, and abolitionists arising in the last few years, we're abolitionists.
How many, I'm asking you questions. I've been going to this church for about a year.
Okay.
And I believe there are people that are devoted to causes against injustice.
Okay.
And the gospel, we're called to spread the good news, but not going to say to you, every single person maybe have a different calling in terms of where their ministry lies, and obviously you've been called to talk about this.
It's not a calling. You're right, but not like to the. I'm not saying every Christian has to go to the abortion mill, because people are working and they can't be there every hour. I can't be there every hour. But what I'm saying is, I'm just going to put it bluntly because I'm just going to be honest. Okay. It's absolutely pathetic how when I've gone to the abortion mills for the past decade, I just thought this is so pathetic that there are more Catholics than Christians out here. I mean, the Christians, it's embarrassing how empty the sidewalks are everywhere I go. There's only been maybe a couple times where the sidewalks, had several people on them, and that was for maybe a church was coming out there, but it's almost non-existent. And I'd say we can be involved in different ministries, but let's prioritize this one because these children are being slaughtered. It's like, okay, let's do drug ministry and homeless ministry while not neglecting our most needy neighbors, because children who are going to be murdered tomorrow morning, scheduled to be murdered, they're the most needy orphans in our culture. No one in our culture is more of an orphan and has more urgent need of help than them, because their parents are literally going to pay a hired assassin to rip their child to pieces. And for us to not act like that's a big deal, we're not obeying the second great commandment to love your neighbor as yourself.
Another question. Obviously, you guys are the way you're addressing it as you're going. You're kind of like the most reactive. I'm trying to figure this out too. So just sometimes I speak out loud to figure out the best solutions to things, like the way people think about abortion, non-believers, and I don't know if you've ever had conversations with like young women who were contemplating abortion. When I say that, I mean to really ask them what their current thinking process is, and to talk about the truth of God's word, and to try to be a minister of reconciliation, not to deny how terrible the decision is, but to see them as people who are confused and really, they're making a choice based on really bad thinking processes, and they need the love and knowledge of Jesus Christ. We need to balance truth and grace. It's like I know so little about abortion, so forgive me, Nicholas.
I'd say this is the pastor's fault. The pastor is not leading you right. If I don't know does he ever talk about it here?
I've only been here for a year. As far as
a year is enough. Has he ever mentioned it from the pulpit ever? The pastor?
Abortion?
Yeah. Other than maybe talking about
passing. I can't think of any sermon specifically on taking the lives of unborn children.
That's a problem.
But,
pastors don't talk about it, and that's why you don't know much about it, because pastors and leadership, for the most part, they don't talk about it. And I know for me, the church I was going to, when I found out about this Holocaust, I don't recall once that they ever even mentioned abortion. Not once. No sermon and no mention whatsoever. And I'm like, why don't they talk about this? And that's when we had the most notorious abortionist in the entire world in that city. And my church wasn't talking about it. And I'm like, what is wrong with us? Why am I the only one who cares about this? And I'm not saying I was the only one who was pro-life or anti-abortion. Why was I the only one who was actually, children were being murdered and we're not doing anything about it? And most pastors, they're guilty if they're not talking about this. They should be the ones prioritizing it. Pastors should be leading their congregation out to the abortion mills. I mean, and I realize pastors are busy. I realize that.
Yes.
But they make things priorities. They decide what they make priorities, and this should be a priority to end this. Or else, what does it say about America when we profess to be Christians and yet we murder children by the thousands every day? Our Christianity means nothing if we allow us to continue. And when we say God bless America and we butcher his image bearers by the millions, our Christianity means nothing.
When you know that IVF, in vitro fertilization,
we're not obeying the second great commandment.
Thousands upon thousands
our priorities aren't right. Like,
every single
we may do good things. We may help out with the homeless. We may send missionaries to other countries. Those are good things. But we're ignoring the greatest injustice in our culture today. We're ignoring it. And those who do bring an urgent message, not all the time. I'm not saying it's even happened here, but Christians they get angry with us for having for encouraging them to do something. They get angry with us. Why?
What is this church doing about the hormonal
Christians should be
murder epidemic?
Like years ago, before I was doing a lot of things I'm doing now. If I saw Christians out in front of my church doing this, I would have been grateful. I'm like, finally, Christians who actually care about this. No one here at this church cares about this. I'm the only one. They just ignore me. Finally, there's Christians out there that care. I'd probably join them. And I told those in my church, don't call the police on them, because believe it or not, we've had police called on us. We just had it, before we came here. But I'd say, brethren, and talk to the pastor, don't hate on those brothers or sisters out there. Let's invite them in and talk to them. Because we're not acting like children being murdered. I'm the only one here who cares, and no one's listening to me.
Nicholas, this is what I can. I know you're not going to know whether or not I do it or not, but I can agree to do more research online about abortion, especially in the Chicagoland area. And
check out the website on there.
Okay, I will.
And
I do know Tyler Jones. He's actually usually see him on a weekly basis.
Okay.
I don't know how active he is in this anymore.
I'm not real active with this. I haven't seen him in months.
See, I know his approach is a little different to
Is your
Ian's.
pastor teaching you how to abolish abortion? Or just cope with abortion?
One thing that's really helped me is not just like the Abolish Human Abortion website, but also looking up on YouTube, Abolish Human Abortion, seeing Christians and abolitionists go out to the streets, go to churches. I started seeing that, and I'm thinking, that's excellent that they're doing that, and I want to join them. Because I've realized for years that Christianity in America is terrible. We live comfortable lives while our culture is going to hell. We live comfortable lives when children are being murdered, homosexuality is paraded in the streets, and we don't. So many professing Christians live just like the world. And there's a reason for that, because the pulpits are silent. And this Holocaust continues because pastors are silent and Christians, they don't care, they're apathetic. And a few Christians they do wake up. When you have a lot of wake up call like this, a few do wake up. And I don't know if, like, one thing that people will say or ask us is, you should have met with the leadership first, the pastors, the elders. And I just tell them, I'm not opposed to that, but it's been done. I've talked to people who've talked to leadership and pastors, they called churches and emailed them and got nowhere. You call 1,000 churches and they don't want to do anything. So
I'm not going to argue with you about the one thing that I agree with you on a lot of points. The worldliness of our church not facing injustice, like not tackling the issues. But man, I can just, like I said, I'm going to head out in a minute, but I'm going to do research. I can talk to people about it.
That'd be good, because you'll be one of the few, if not the only ones. I can assure you
It's a
that.
conversation that should happen. I'm not saying that this is the way to do it, but a conversation should be had. Absolutely. And people need to, need to think of
And it
more
needs to be repented of.
God-honoring ways to
So
talk to
many
people,
living
have
selfish
conversations.
lifestyles,
I just don't know the problem. Honestly, like I said, I don't even
deny yourself, pick up your
know
cross and follow me.
a lot
That's the
of
word of God. That's the word.
what it looks like.
That's
So
the words of
I'll start
Jesus
there.
Christ.
But I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go.
Well, if you're the only one who talks about it in there, ask him in there. Why am I the only one talking about this? Because that's a problem if you're the only one who actually has any urgency.
The religious hypocrite.
Anyways,
Thank you,
I
Nick,
don't have all the
for
answers.
sticking with me.
Hypocrite.
I don't have all the answers either. I
I
just
know you got a heart for it.
But you neglect the weightier
I'm out
matters
here.
of the law.
thanks for talking with me.
Yeah, man.
Mercy,
Well, have a good
faithfulness,
weekend.
You as well.